Welcome to Sales Accelerators, Winning Strategies for Financial Professionals, an educational webinar series that explores the latest tools and concepts to help boost your sales performance and drive business growth. Join us as we analyze trending topics in life insurance, investigate the latest headlines, and discuss solutions to accommodate your clients' unique needs. Please welcome your host, Kurt Fasen, Executive Vice President of Sales and Marketing.
Hello, welcome to another edition of our webinar series, Sales Accelerators. We're here to give you ideas and strategies that you can put into action to increase your sales and help your clients. And it's a brand new year. Welcome to 2026. I'm pleased to have Terri Getman, who has joined us many times, our Vice President of Advanced Sales, to join us to look at big opportunities for life insurance planning for this coming year. Terri, welcome.
Nice to be here, Kurt. It's always fun to kick off the year with some new ideas that we can talk to our clients and advisors about.
Absolutely. Well, now, folks, as you're either listening or watching us, I want you just to keep a couple things in mind. We're going to be talking about life insurance solutions that are really trending. And Terri is going to focus in on really three big opportunities for 2026. Now, don't forget, as part of the invitation and your registration, you receive something called a webinar action plan. And that's just a fancy way to say we gave you something to keep notes on. Because it's our hope that as we're going through this material, a client, a prospect, an idea will come in your mind of, I should really talk to. Don't think you're going to remember later. Write it down now so that after our time together today, you can follow up with our team, either in the field or at the home office, to help really figure out how and if these strategies might work with your clients. All right, let's get started. All right, as we head into 26, life insurance planning is becoming even more important. And that's really thanks to the tax changes that were introduced by HR 1. More than ever, life insurance isn't just about protecting income. It still is, but it's also playing a bigger role in overall wealth and estate and even legacy planning. And so it's a great time to revisit existing coverage and look for fresh planning ideas. Now, for several years, on this call and on others, you've heard a lot about estate planning, and it's all revolved around the prospect of high federal exemption being cut in half from maybe 14 to 7 million, and all sorts of predictions were made. However, the HR 1 has now made the high exemption permanent. We hope.
For 4 years.
But maybe we can talk about why this is important. So, Terri, I'm going to turn over to you. Why is it important right now?
Yeah, we have been doing a lot of planning on the idea that exemption was going to drop down to 7 million. And a lot of people actually implemented plans based upon the 7 million. But now, as we know, we're going to have a $15 million exemption this year. Inflation, again, will cost of living for at least the next 4 years. I don't believe it's going to change. So we have some permanency. So now's a great time to get those plans that were put on hold. Obviously, moving forward, since we can do a little bit better planning. But it also begs the question, what do we do with those plans that did planning based upon 7, may have set up, maybe complex strategies that may not necessarily be needed now, may have set up life insurance trusts that may not be needed now. So going back and visiting clients about, just where are we at in the state process now that we have some permanency and we know what the exemption is going to be, and we can now design plans with a little bit better eye towards the future.
I think that's great. It really helps us set the stage. So, all right, let's say that a policy is owned by an ILIT, Irrevocable Life Insurance Trust. What can you do with that?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I think the first thing that most financial advisors think about is, well, we'll just drop the policy and start something new. That may not even be an option If you've got a client whose health has changed, it's very likely, obviously, their age has changed, and so you're looking at more expensive options there. So the first place, and from an advisor standpoint, there are going to be the product options that I'm going to look at. From reviewing of estate plans, the attorney tax advisor standpoint is probably reviewing the document. From the product standpoints, outside of dropping the contract and starting something anew someplace else, you can look at what are the options within the maintaining the policy that you have. Maybe it's you've got a contract that may be several years old and you now need long-term care. So maybe do something like an indemnity hybrid form of long-term care. Notice I said indemnity. I still don't believe that a reimbursement style hybrid product inside of a life insurance trust will keep the policy outside of the estate. But your indemnity style arrangements, most legal scholars now feel that that is a safe option. You may want to do something, how about a 1035 into an annuity? Annuity, a deferred annuity if the trust qualifies. Certain types of trust, get around the non-natural entity rule. But maybe we look at, annuitizing, taking distributions and taking that money that's received and buying that outside policy through the annuity stream of income. So that might be a potential option from a product standpoint. When you get into the trust document standpoint, there you're kind of looking at the document and what state law will provide. So things like, well, what does the document provide in the way of distribution? Can we distribute this policy out and then terminate the trust because the trust no longer has any economic substance? Some state laws, like my old state of Iowa, as long as everybody agreed, the grantor and the beneficiaries, we could terminate an irrevocable trust and distribute assets. So that might be an option. We might be able to modify the terms of the trust, especially some of your administrative terms. Some trusts provide trust protector trustees that might give them a little bit more flexibility and maybe changing some of the terms of the trust internally. So those types of things can be looked at. But, if nothing works in the trust, then we get to things, how can we get this policy out? And no, a trustee can't simply change the owner and beneficiary. I get that a lot, call into the office. Can the owner change the owner and beneficiary? Yeah, we'll send you the form out. A trustee has a fiduciary obligation to create, not to just, they can't gift. They've got to get fair market value in return. So they can certainly sell the policy, but that in itself results in a few more complexities along the way as well.
Yeah, well, that's a good reminder. Terri, let's just take it a little bit further. If an advisor is exploring the feasibility of a trustee removing the policy from the trust by selling the policy to a new owner, what are some of the things they should consider?
Yeah, well, there's two big tax hurdles that they have to overcome. One is called the transfer for value, and the second one is called the 3-year retained incidence of ownership rule, or the retention rule, the 3-year rule. Under the transfer for value, that applies when you change an owner or a beneficiary on a policy and in exchange receive valuable consideration. Well, I just told you the trustee can't give away, so they have to sell this policy. So that's going to be the valuable consideration. Now, fortunately, there are some exceptions to that rule, and one is he can sell it to the insured. So if we have a policy that doesn't have much value to it, that might be an economical way of pulling the policy out, replacing it with cash inside the trust. And of course, if that cash is fairly small because the policy is a fairly new one, then you may have the economic substance of whether or not the trust is viable any longer and just terminate the trust. So that might be an option. The problem, however, is when you sell it to the insured, we now own the contract. And now we have a 3-year retention. Now, if the new exemption at 30 million for a couple, you don't have to worry about taxes, or you live in a state that, doesn't have to worry about taxes, that would not be Minnesota,
Right.
or Washington or Oregon for that matter. And those 3 states are on my hit list for if you live in those 3 states or have clients in those 3 states, the exemption amount is really small. So trying to get out of taxes is a little bit more difficult there. But if you are in a state that doesn't have state death taxes like Florida, California for that matter, retaining the policy may not be a problem, and then just treat it as personal needs. But where you live in, like the state of Minnesota, and you want to transfer it to maybe a trust that has better terms, maybe, if you can't do it within the trust itself, which again, that's kind of a legal call, it may be possible to do it within the trust itself, then you could, again, sell the policy to the new trust, as long as that new trust is a grantor trust, which a lot of your life insurance trusts are. So again, that sale removes it from the 3-year rule. It has to be for full and adequate consideration, which we don't know exactly what that means. So there is obviously a tax risk. But if you've got a healthy client, the risk of somebody passing within 3 years, especially on a survivorship type contract, is pretty darn small, where you have to have both of them dying within 3 years. So a few steps, but it's possible to get the policy out, and it's possible to repurpose the policy.
And that's great news, because a lot of people did take steps to do planning last year based on the 7 million. And now they're sitting there. So I think that gives you some alternatives of what you can do, what you need to stay away from, and potentially some opportunities in there for solutions and sales for you as an advisor. Let's talk about another change that's happening in 26. It has to do with catch-up contributions. Maybe you should touch on that just for a minute, Terri.
Yeah, this one is probably flying under the radar of most advisors, in that you may remember back in 2023, Secure 2.0 was passed. And as part of the Secure 2.0 legislation, there was actually language that said if you have highly compensated individuals and they are making catch-up contributions, so the individual is 50 and older, that those contributions can no longer be under the traditional IRA, traditional contribution, pre-tax contribution rules. They had to be made in Roth. Well, when that was first established, of course, we were like going into COVID, still in COVID. The 401k plan administrators kind of like, went up in arms, like, we can't get this done within the next 12 months. And so it was pretty much put on a hold. That hold ended on December 31st. So starting in 2026, your highly compensated individuals that are in 50 and older that can do catch-up contributions must now do those as Roth. So what is a highly compensated individual? Not necessarily that highly compensated. It's 145. So that is, that can hit more people than you think. So let's stop and think about this. Okay, I've got, and it only applies to like 401ks, 457, and your 403b type plans. So let's stop and see. You've got a person age 50. They're maxing out their retirement plans because they're trying to save for retirement. The kids are graduated from college. The mortgage is, getting to the point where maybe we can start, paying that off. So we're really putting money in, and we want to do it on a pre-tax basis to get that deduction. That now disappears. So it's an after-tax contribution. Money grows tax deferred. And when I pull it out, it's tax free. Now, that sounds awful lot like another product that I know of, that I don't have the restrictions that I do with a Roth contribution.
It sure does.
So,
it sure does.
That opens up, I think, a couple of opportunities that we can talk to our clients about.
Well, let's talk about those opportunities. What are some alternatives we should think about with our clients?
Yeah. Well, the first one I would talk about is a SERP or a deferred comp,
Mhm.
because a SERP and a deferred comp from a tax perspective looks a lot like my pre-tax qualified plan contributions. If I set up a deferred comp, which is nothing more than an agreement between an employee who must be a top hat employee, we'll talk about that here shortly, and an employer, where we agree to defer compensation. And since the compensation is deferred by the employer, I'm not taxed on it. Okay, so
Right.
that sounds a lot like my qualified plan contribution.
Yes.
The money accumulates in the employer's bucket, you know, so it's not taxed to me. So I got my tax deferral.
Mhm.
And when I hit that triggering event, which is retirement, it becomes taxable.
Right.
Sounds an awful lot like my old traditional qualified plan.
Sure
Don't
is.
have the limitations that I do under a qualified plan. I'm not limited to the 8,000 contribution. I can do more if I want. The big issue is, frankly, I do have to have a position where I'm a top hat employee. And I've got an employer that needs to be willing to enter into this agreement with me. Now, a
Right.
top hat employee is different than a highly compensated employee. A top hat employee is defined as somebody who's in the top 10% of that employer's workforce. That may be significantly more income than the 145. Okay. It may be less. But since we're looking at that 145 amount, if you're not in that top 10, you might be able to stretch it to 15. You can't qualify for a deferred comp arrangement. The other issue is that means we're going to have to set up a plan, and you've got plan administration that goes along with that, and a legal document. Fortunately, one of our partners, has that internal plan administration within the carrier, so that makes that
A little easier.
a
Yeah.
little bit easier.
Mhm.
But you know what?
Mhm.
This deferred comp plan, you know what it's funded with? A
What?
life insurance policy.
There you go. There you go. We like
So
it.
my second option sounds an awful lot like a Roth. It's just doing a personally owned life insurance instead of doing that catch-up contribution. If you have a need for life insurance, survivor income, paying off debt, providing a legacy to
Right.
children, grandchildren, buy a personally owned life insurance policy. It's after tax, just like a Roth. Tax deferred, just like a Roth. Can be accessed through withdrawals and loans, just like a Roth, you know. But again, I'm not limited to when I need to take the money. I'm not limited to how much contribution I can make into a life insurance contract, other than the fact that I have to have a need for the life insurance. So the plain vanilla LIRP arrangement is an alternative to not being able to do a pre-tax catch-up.
I think that's great. I mean, LERPs are very powerful and they give you a lot of flexibility. And in that grid that I know you put together, you can just see it
Yep.
lined up. Contributions and accumulations distribution. It's pretty clear. But you have to have that. You got to have that need, which may very well be a legacy need or something like that, of course. All right, well, let's move on. On this program, we've talked in the past about the Conley decision, and I think we're both seeing the impact the Conley decision is starting to have on buy-sells and buy-sell planning. Maybe you could give an overview of what happened there and how it's affecting the structure of buy-sell agreements.
Yeah. Well, as we know, Conley happened in mid-2024, but it seems like I'm spending my life on a daily basis going through Conley. What Conley dealt with was a situation where we had a family business who entered into an entity purchase buy-sell agreement. An entity purchase buy-sell agreement is one where the business agrees to buy out the interest of a departing owner. They then funded that agreement with business-owned life insurance because the business is the one that's going to buy out the interest of the decedent.
Right.
So, problem was when the majority owner died, they didn't follow the terms of their buy-sell real well. So, horrible facts. horrible. They were supposed to have an annual agreement as to what the value of the business was. 11 years later, they had not done that once. Then in default of not having an annual agreement, they were supposed to do an appraisal. They didn't do that either. They said, here we go. We've got $3.5 million of life insurance. I'll give you the life insurance. You give me the stock. I now own 100% of the business. You got paid for your interest. And then they filed their tax return and declared the value of the business as the purchase price for the life insurance. Now, in the past, the numerous court decisions have said that the obligation of the buy-sell agreement offset the face amount of the life insurance. So I've got a buyout for $3 million in this case. I've got the life insurance for $3 million. It's a wash. No increase on value. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court said, nah, we don't like that. We're going to add the life insurance value, $3 million, on top of the value of the business to get a full fair market value of the business. Well, in this case, that resulted in an additional about $1.6 million of taxes.
Yeah, rough. Oof. Yeah, that's a rude awakening when that happens, Terri.
Yeah. So, when you have especially family businesses, it's harder to, there is a tax provision that says where you can fix the value of the business. Really difficult to do in family-owned businesses. So as a result, and if you live in a state that has state death taxes, like Minnesota, where it doesn't take a very significant business or a fairly significant amount of life insurance, you're going to get this negative tax impact. And so the result has been that legal advisors and CPAs have really gone back to pretty much everybody who has an entity purchase buy-sell arrangement, which, by the way, that I'm as guilty as anybody. I did a lot of entity purchase buy-sell arrangements because you know what? It was easy.
Right.
One policy per person, the business pays for the coverage. If you don't have a buy-sell agreement yet, we can justify it on the basis of key person coverage, and we can work on the buy-sell agreement as we're going through underwriting,
Yep.
So now we have to stop and think about that.
Well, it's changed, right? Everybody thinks about it differently. So what are some alternative options that can be done with existing life insurance?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we can look and see whether or not we should maintain the entity purchase arrangement. If we don't have an estate tax, in fact, there was a very significant case that I was working on for about a year. The advisor got paid over $4,000 of financial planning fee as a result of this case. So it's a great opportunity to go in and talk to business owners about reviewing and reassessing their buy-sell arrangements, which again, we have a carrier that will do an informal valuation and will review the buy-sell agreements with no charge. So he charged the client for $4,000 for doing that and used the carrier. So it was a great deal. But, if it turns out now with a high exemption amount, you can leave it as an entity arrangement. If you don't live in a state that has a lowest exemption amount, leaving it as an entity purchase arrangement. Still, you might want to assess the buy-sell agreement because I said in Connolly, the buy-sell agreement, well, it was with family members. I said family members have more restrictive rules. If you have non-family members, it is possible to fix the value for estate purposes, but you have to follow the rules of the buy-sell agreement. Right. So is your client doing that? If it says you need to have an agreed value on an annual basis, are you doing that? And unfortunately, I see a lot of those buy-sell agreements that have not. They've never had an agreed value, even though that's in their arrangement. But the other thing that will come up as a result of this review, even if they keep it as an entity arrangement, remember the old 101J employer notice and consent rules that transpired, 2006, I think? It's been a while now. How many carriers still do not have automated procedures to make sure that before a policy is issued, that you've received the consent of the person that you're insuring. And people are absolutely flipped when I tell them, you got a single member LLC and it owns a life insurance contract. Guess what? That person has to notify himself.
Right.
So
I mean, there
there
are rules they have to follow.
exactly. And if you don't notify, if you haven't done the notification and received the consent before policy issue, that death benefit becomes subject to income taxation. We
Just
had
a
a
simple
very
thing.
large case, a $30 million phase case between 7 individuals where nobody had done the notice and consent. So guess what? All of those policies had to be replaced in order to maintain, because there is no solution. If you've missed it, you've got a year for the CPA to catch it. And then it has to be, you have to have a legitimate reason as to why, and why you missed it. Good luck on that one. I have no idea what the guidelines are there.
That'd be tough.
You've got income taxable death benefit. How would you like to receive the $30 million income tax hit? It was not real appealing to this business owner. So that's certainly one solution. And
But what if you
obviously,
can't? Yeah, what if you can't leave it as an entity purchase though? There must be some other options.
yeah. The one that Clarence Thomas, which is Chief Justice that wrote the Supreme Court decision,
Yeah.
was cross purchase. Okay, the traditional cross purchase, each person owns a policy on the other. So if you got two, A owns a policy on B, is the owner and beneficiary on B, B owns a policy, is the owner and beneficiary on A. Simple, clean. Okay. And you know what? If you only have 2 people, you can actually potentially do that. Change the owner and beneficiary on the business owned policies to each other. However, we got some problems there. Most businesses that I tend to work with tend to be filing S corporate status.
Yep.
The change of an owner and beneficiary pursuant to a buy-sell agreement is a transfer for value violation. So I can't simply change a business-owned, an S corporation business-owned policy from uninsured A to shareholder B, being the owner and beneficiary, without causing that death benefit to be subject to income taxation. I have to meet an exception, and a co-shareholder is not an exception.
Thanks.
So not only do you have this transfer for value problems, if you got 3 owners and you got 3 policies, how do you do a cross purchase when you need 6?
Yeah, you need more. Absolutely.
Yeah, you need more. So if I happen to be a partnership, I can now get the policies out, but I now need more policies. So again, the Connolly decision and the impact on really needing to examine not only is this going to have an impact from an estate standpoint, but reviewing it from an income tax standpoint, and what are other options, and can I do that with my existing policy structure? You may not be able to do that. So the long and the short of it is, maybe you take these business-owned policies, distribute them to the insureds, have them own it personally for personal uses, and buy new policies on a cross-purchase basis.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be considered now post Connolly, and you mentioned additional considerations, if we're trying to transfer the business owned policies. Is there anything else you want to elaborate on in regard to that?
Yeah, in addition to, the traditional cross-purchase arrangement, there are other types of structures that are out there. One is the business continuation LLC, where you literally create another business entity to own the contracts, so you can avoid having multiple policies. It's a 2-step process where when the business owner dies, the proceeds come into the business continuation LLC. They buy out the interest that individual has in the LLC, and then they distribute the proceeds out to the co-owners, and then they do a cross purchase. Complexity. I don't know too many
Agreed.
business owners that like complexity. Also, when you tell them that they have to go see their attorney and write another another business entity, yeah, if I can get around that, In fact, the case with seven individuals I've talking about, we were going down that direction because they actually had a few of their owners that were going to trigger estate taxes. So getting it outside of the business was their objective. And then when the estate taxes were maintained high, they decided we'll stay with the entity purchase arrangement. And that's when the 101J notice and consent problem came up. We were at the time looking at setting up that business continuation LLC. And I think we were into maybe month 6 or 7. And they still had not done. So that's more complex. Another kind of fun solution, though, is several years ago, John Hancock came up with something they called the cross endorsement buy-sell arrangement.
Right.
And literally what you do is you take the business-owned policy and you do a distribution to the insured. And then you do a kind of like an endorsement split dollar of the death benefit to the co-owner. So I retain, as the insured, own the contract, and I do a collateral assignment to my co-owner. Now, that transfer is a transfer for value. So it doesn't work in S-corps again, but it works if you've got a partnership exception. And so if you have an LLC that happens to be maybe own real estate, that, most of the time those are structured as partnerships. So that could be my potential exception. This strategy I really like because it also helps the idea maybe buying permanent insurance coverage, because I own the contract, I'm going to accumulate the cash. And assuming I'm going to sell my business, say at 65, 67, because I've made, all my money and I'm now, how business owners, their business is their retirement, right?
Right.
I'm going to sell the business. I now don't need the collateral assignment. I terminate the assignment, take the policy back. I now have supplemental retirement income. So I've mentioned that on several situations, and that has an appeal as a intermediary buy-sell funding and long-term retirement income supplement strategy.
Terri, as always, it's great. This is just a wealth of knowledge. So hopefully you all picked up on the fact there are many different things. I heard more than 3, but at least 3 big things you should be looking at as a result of the legislation that has been passed. And there's a way for you to really get your arms around it, and that is call us up, talk to Terri. Yep. Talk to our case design team, talk to your regional sales directors. They're in place to help bring you the resources, either here at DBS or through some of our partners, as Terri alluded to, that will help you address these very big and real problems that your clients are going to be facing in 2026 with some very viable solutions. As you've seen in the past, DBS has a whole bunch of different resources on our website, many of them authored by Terri, resources and tools and things that can help you navigate this, but you're not alone. You've got the whole team staying next to you, from our sales team to our internal team, as well as our advanced sales team, partnering with our advanced underwriting team. We're here to help you be successful and for your clients to find great solutions. Terri, I'd like to turn back to you for one more final word.
Well, I said it's a new year. We've got changes that are occurring. Change always results in opportunity. Looking at some of the old arrangements that we set up in the last couple of years that might need to be modified, brushed up, and look at new options that are out there today.
Well said. Folks, thank you for taking time out of your day to be with us again. Terri, thank you for joining. Good to see you again. And until next time, we look forward to seeing you back here for another Sales Accelerators. Take care, everyone.